Well, this reading that we looked at this morning says that as we preach the gospel of Christ, we are making known the manifold wisdom of God, not only to those that we teach, but even in the heavenly realms. The spirit beings beyond this world hear the truth through the things that we say and do. It's exciting to be part of trying to take the truth of God's Word to those who know Him not. Sometimes we think that mission work is what we do over there somewhere. But mission work's what we do in here and what we do here and with lives that we touch all the time. Betty and I served the Lord in Nova Scotia, Canada for 23 years and then moved to a small little congregation in the town of 700 people at Nueces Canyon. And I've been associated with that church for the past 20 years, and they still support our work here, and we're very much involved with them. They send me to the Philippines regularly to try and teach and train preachers in the Philippines. Most of my preaching there is not to the public, to people in general, but more training the preachers and teaching them through the schools that are associated with Sunset, for them that are there, or other places where we have opportunities to try and teach the preachers. So this morning I want to give you a little bit of a rundown on some of the things that have been happening in the Philippines with the last trip that we made. Betty and I just returned about April the 3rd. That was an interesting trip, to say the least. Getting from the Philippines back to the U.S. is no problem at all. Getting from Houston to Lubbock was devastating. All right. The Philippines are made up of 8,107 islands. And to attest to that, I've got June and June. I don't know why it wasn't in April or May, but we got June and June here this morning. So later on, June will introduce his friend from Olongapo. The islands are made up of three major groups. There's the Luzon up in the northern part, that big island. There's a bunch of islands scattered around the middle, the Versailles, and then a big island down the bottom, that's Mindanao. You can see Manila. Not by me doing that, though. You could have seen Manila. There we go, thank you. All right, right here. So this is the main city of the Philippines, and the capital. We have an apartment there in Manila. So I go often enough. Instead of taking clothes back and forth every time, I just leave everything in a little apartment, and it makes it easy to travel. That way I can fill my suitcases with solar players and the likes, or books and Bibles for people. Okay. Their money looks like Canadian money, very colorful. It's interesting that the exchange rate right now is 50 to 1, 50 pesos for $1 American. So you take $100 over, you go away with a pocket full of cash. This is a market that's just a half a block around from our little apartment. So a great place to go and get lots of good fresh vegetables. What do you think of that, Gibby? I like that all the time. When we arrived this time, Betty twisted her back the first night we were there. She picked her suitcase up and passed it up the stairs to a brother, twisted her back, and spent most of her time trying to get over that problem. So she stayed in our little apartment for almost a month. When I stay there, the only appliance I really need is a coffee pot. But with Betty staying there, I thought maybe she might need a little more help. So I tried to make her a nice dish one day. I thought I'd make her some good Texas gumbo. So I went down to the market and got some okra and tomatoes and all this stuff, and went home and tried to prepare it, but didn't have anything to cook in. So I ended up cooking it all in a coffee pot. I'll show you in a few minutes. Before we went to Nueces Canyon, before I went to the Philippines, I went to Nueces Canyon and made a report on the last trip that I had made. And while I was there, I had an opportunity to preach to the congregation. I presented a lesson I do called I Am Paul. You've seen me do part of that here. I take 200 Bible verses that I've memorized, and I tell the story of the life of Paul. So I did that, and this man, Randy Ward, spoke to me later on. He said, well, Paul said, we were talking about Romans chapter 6. I've studied with this man for many, many years. He would never become a Christian. So that night, I preached at him. I don't usually pick one person out and preach at one person, but I preached at Randy, and Randy knew I was preaching at him. Afterwards, the church had a fellowship, so Randy and I stayed in the auditorium, and we talked for an hour and a half. And he gave me all of the traditional reasons why you don't need to be baptized. And I said, well, just let's look at what the Bible says. Let's look at the Bible. And finally, he said, what? Are you going to be here tomorrow? I said, I'll be leaving about 6 o'clock in the morning. He said, can you baptize me tonight? So Randy decided to be baptized. This excites me so much. He's such a good man, has such a good family. His wife's been a Christian for a long time, and her family were strong members of the church there at Nueces Canyon. So Randy was baptized that night, and while I was baptizing him, this man, Don Smirnoff, came with tears running down his face. We were just coming up with the baptismal water. He says, will you baptize me as well? So I baptized Don. He had been baptized early on in life. He'd gotten into all kinds of difficulties. He said, I don't feel like I did the right thing for the right reason. What I'm trying to say is mission work's not what you do way over there. It's wherever God puts your life, right? So here's some people right here that have become Christians, part of the work that we're doing. It's exciting. You'll recognize the man in the middle, Brother Chris Watson, a graduate from here who is now the preacher at Nueces Canyon. He and Thomasina are doing an excellent job with the church there. It's inspiring to see. Okay, here's downtown Manila. So we're not talking about just being in a jungle or, a place that's a third world country. Manila has grown amazingly. It's about 30 million population in the Metro Manila area right now. Before I left, there was a prediction that there would be an earthquake. You may recall we mentioned that along the way. Well, there was. There was actually two while we were there, but not in the area where we were, and nothing of the size that was predicted. So they're still saying there's going to be a devastating earthquake. The Philippines are given to typhoons, tsunamis, droughts, just disaster after disaster. And the people that they respond are so resilient. They just keep going on. It makes them, I think, a special people. So here's my coffee pot gumbo. we tried to make to help take care of Betty while I was there in Manila. Now, because Betty stayed in Manila, I did not go north up to Baguio and up into the mountains to do some of the work I was going to do. I had a traveling partner, Ken Wilkie, with me. So Ken went up to Baguio, and I'm trying to find my flash drive. Here it is. I sent my flash drive, and he taught my lessons for me. I stayed with Betty. So while I was in Manila, I had texted a brother who was a deaf man, and I've been in touch with him for about 5 years, who has a church there somewhere in Manila, and I've always wanted to go meet the man. So I got his address, and it ends up his congregation meets less than 2 miles from my apartment. So Betty and I went over to meet with the deaf congregation. As soon as we showed up, of course, I was going to be the speaker for the morning. But they said to me, would you please sign slow? Yeah, that's all I can do. Slow is good for me if they sign slowly too. So Rebecca had us do a Bible story as part of our sign language training, so I just did that story, and then went back the next day and used the next Sunday and used a PowerPoint and taught a gospel lesson in sign language. I did. That excites me. Okay, I didn't know I could do that. Philippine Sign Language is not exactly the same as ASL, but close enough that they understood. This morning, I got an email from this brother, Dave Carvo, in the Philippines, saying they're planning a gospel meeting in October. Could I come and be there? So that's interesting. Rebecca's going to have to do an awful lot of teaching if that's going to happen. So here's some of the brethren. There was about 20 gathered this morning. The next week there was about 30. There's another, everybody in the congregation, every person is deaf. There's no one that speaks and no one that hears. There's another congregation that meets in Manila of about 60 that are deaf. So that's where I'm supposed to go in October, if that works out. So some of the deaf brothers and sisters there. Then we went back to the church in Manila. This is where the Manila School of Evangelism is. This happens to be the young professionals class. Some of the ones that were there distributed solar players to several of the people in that congregation, those who are studying Bible and training to become ministers, those who are involved in the work of the church. Then met these two young men in Cebu that were needing solar players. They had actually written to Sunset, and I think Jeff had sent their names over, and I got hold of the name, and they said, next time you go to Cebu, can you take solar players to these guys? And I said, well, I'll be there in 3 days. So took solar players and gave them to these two fellows. They were so excited to be able to get those. When Tim Burrow was with me last trip, we distributed solar players in Angeles City. I went back to Angeles this time because the Philippine International Bible Institutes just had their graduation last Saturday. They asked if I could be there for that, and I said, no, we got to go back home. Well, they wanted solar players for their graduates. So I took to Igato, right? Can I go back one, please? Okay. This is Igato, the director of the school there. We went up and took him solar players for all the graduates, and last Saturday, those who graduated from the 4 Philippine schools received solar players. This is the school at Batangas that Tim and I visited, and we took solar players to them. I want to point out 2 men. This man directs the school there, and this man teaches the Hebrew and the Greek to the Philippine students. By the way, fellas, in the Philippine International Bible Institute, Hebrew is a required course at Batangas. But Tommy, this man who is 55 years old, a month and a half ago, had a massive heart attack and died suddenly, died that day. So the school has lost a good Bible teacher. Sorry to have that happen. The man in the middle directs the school. His name is Moses. Ken and I had to go see Moses because we have a brother that the Nueces Canyon Church has supported, a preacher, who got in an immorality problem. And we'd heard stories about it from various people. So the man in the middle was involved with the situation, knew what was happening firsthand, so we went there to talk to him and find out what was happening. And then went back and wrote to the brother who's having a problem. He's now in Australia. And spoke to him about what we saw in our evaluation. It was interesting. He wrote back that day and said, thank you. Thank you for not just listening to gossip, but for checking out and finding out what's going on. And then he tried to present his side of it, and we're working on trying to take care of that. That was a difficult thing, but sometimes you've got to deal with stuff like that. Sometimes people have problems, and that's part of the work too. So here's Tommy, the brother who's just passed away. When I went to that school in Batangas, they had one whiteboard in the school. No projectors, no computers, no books, one board, and Tommy had written the most beautiful Hebrew on it. Bob, you'd have been impressed. It was just looked like a piece of art. He had all of his Hebrew words written out in the alphabet and everything on the one board. Nobody wanted to erase it. So when we were there, we left them with a projector and computer and stuff. Now, June ought to recognize this. This is the school in Naga. I put that up there just to let June see his family and stuff. It was good being with them trip before last. When I had given out solar players, I saw this on a fella's bed. His bed was just a mat on the floor, a folded up blanket, but on the corner of his bed's his solar player and headphones. So as he goes to bed each night, this brother's listening to our solar players. What has happened is that we have empowered these preachers with the solar players. And every day, almost every day, I'll get an email or a Facebook picture from one of the churches or one of the preachers baptizing somebody into Christ out of all of these different areas. Now, they were doing that before, but now they've really been empowered with the solar players. It's making a difference for them. So I appreciate the fact that these are available for distribution there. Last time, I went to this church in Bethune. They were having a door knocking and an outreach area because they wanted to start a new Bible study center in this tiny community. So we were there to help door knock and do some teaching during that time. Well, here's the sign that now hangs in front of the Bible Study Center. Just within the last few months, the center has opened up across the street from one of the state universities. I mean, right across the street from it. Now, it's only a small little spot, very narrow little room, and you can't put but maybe 15 people in it. But they've already baptized one of the girls that started coming, and it's only been open for a few weeks. So while we were there, Brother Ken was teaching a lesson called What Controls Your Life? We had maybe a dozen or so show up for that for a couple of nights. We taught the first night. We're going back the second night, and on the way there, we stopped in San Diego, pulled out of a parking lot across the main street, 5 o'clock at night, right across the 2 lanes when the front wheel fell off the vehicle we were driving. Ball joint broke and the A-frame dropped to the pavement. So it just left us stranded. I'll show you in a second. Here's the church building in Isabella. Little church that the whole congregation wouldn't be as wide as these set of chairs are. But they're doing an amazing job at training preachers and reaching out to the area. So they had a hope, a dream of trying to build a Bible study mission training center for this tiny little church. So we helped them buy a piece of land. It cost us $2,500, which gave about 8 times the size of the land of what they have there. And then they started building a Bible training center. Last Sunday, I guess that's yesterday, they had their first big service here with about 200 gathering who are coming from area churches for part of a training workshop on 2 Corinthians. Here's what the new building looks like. This is the ground floor, a kitchen area, and if you could look across the room the opposite direction, this will be an inside Bible study area. They had a couple of bedrooms that they made for the visiting missionaries. That's Ken and I. We're glad that they're going to be there. Got a CR. That's a comfort room. And this is a good-looking comfort room. It's tiled. It's got running water, commode, and a place to shower. So they've got 2 of those in the building. It's going to be very nice. This is the upstairs part. Now, the upstairs is open to the environment. It'll seat about 200. What intrigued me with this, if you look at all of the structure work here of the steel, the last time I was there, I went down to visit the site and I could hear, I wondered what it was, and I went upstairs and there's a Filipino brother sitting there with a hacksaw and a mountain of angle iron, and every piece of those trusses he cut by hand and put them together and made all of this stuff. It's amazing the job they did. But, cut every piece of it by hand. Man, I'd have bought a cutoff saw real quick if it were me doing it. Anyhow, beautiful building. Here's what it looks like from the outside. They're putting a well in back, and I like mechanics, so I get intrigued by this. Here's a little one-lung engine going along. Alongside the one-lung engine, there's a little pump, and it's got a hose going over here to a hole in the ground that they filled up with water. That water comes out this pipe, goes back around, down this pipe. This is the rear end of a pickup truck. And that drive shaft coming over and joining to the pump. And the rear end comes down, and then the drill bit's down the ground. And they've drilled 150 feet through the rock to get water with it. It's amazing what they can do. Okay, here's where the front wheel fell off of our car. And 5 o'clock, so some traffic officers came along to watch. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 that I can see right there that are watching while we get our vehicle fixed up and eventually towed off the road and taken care of. Now, one of the things that was special this time was I got to go to Pagadian, down in the southern part of Mindanao, which is in a strong Muslim-controlled area. They don't normally have Americans there. They had suggested that we fly to the airport. A driver picked us up, took us straight to the church compound, and straight back when we finished our lessons. We didn't stop to eat along the way or go to shops or walk the streets or anything. Usually I do all of that when I'm in the Philippines. I love to get out and walk, but not here. They said, don't bring your wives. So we went to Patadian, and I taught a course on the 2 covenants. We had about 60 people attending throughout the workshop time from 12 different congregations that do not normally get much input from American brethren. So they were very excited for the opportunity. Now, this is exciting because these guys are teaching the gospel in Muslim communities. They're telling people about the love of Christ. You know what? We can't change with bombs and missiles. We can with the Word of God. And this fellows that we're studying with here, that's what they're doing day by day. Here's the ladies preparing meals for us. Our cook cooking here over some sticks in a big pot. The schedule called for us to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get ready. Devotional was at 5. I wanted to have my shower and be out of the way of everybody else, so usually started at 3 o'clock in the morning to try and that's not unusual in the Philippines. The congregation or the guys that we were working with, their church building is a very nice looking building. And Paul showed up, and Paul got to teach there. Now what was interesting was after Paul had presented his lesson, some of the young people came and got together with a preacher. They studied with that preacher, and then that evening 3 of them were baptized into Christ. Everybody wanted to have their picture made with Paul. So, and here's the picture of the 3 young people being baptized, the 2 girls and this young man. So we're thankful for that. Gave out solar players while we were there. Again, catch what's happening. Here we are in a Muslim-controlled area, and these guys are taking our solar players and using that to teach themselves more Bible. This man had to leave early, so I gave him his. For some reason, they feel like we are giants among the brethren over there. These fellows came to my room at the end of the workshop to receive solar players. They asked that I would pass them out in private. They said, if everybody else knows these guys are getting solar players, we're going to have a riot. Everybody's going to want them. There'll be jealousy. So I went and gave them out privately to them. And there's a great need for us to do more of this, and that will be coming in the future. Young girl insisted that her mother take her to town so she could buy some gifts for Ken and I. So her mother took her to town, and she got this little gift for me and one for Ken. Don't know what it is. But Jim, maybe you can help me. I'll bring it. It looks like a tablecloth. Betty set it out, and it was the right size for our table. It's real pretty, nice material, but it's like a pillowcase, And so I don't know if I'm supposed to get in it or just what to do, but I'm thankful for it. It was such a great gesture. This girl just wanted to be with us. And then that evening, the last evening we were there, this beautiful sunset came up, and by the time I ran and got my camera, most of it was gone. But looking out of the compound across the community, I saw this cross on another church building. Now, I'm not into putting crosses up on church buildings. But I thought, how much better this looks than loudspeakers on top of one of those tall towers on the Muslim mosque, which are everywhere. So isn't it good to see that the Word of God is doing its work when it's preached and taught around the world? It's so good to be part of that. I invite you to come join me. Be going back again for October, November, be going back again in March. Usually go in June. Can't go this June. Senior AIM students are all taking a trip to Scotland. So I can't go to the Philippines in June, but if you're interested, I'd like to talk to you about going to the Philippines and experiencing the mission field there. God bless. Thank you all.